that I regard our next guest as one of the leading journalists of this country. Not only as a leading journalist, but a fine writer, an award-winning writer indeed. He's a journalist for both the press and for stuff.co.nz. He is I think, one of the best journalists in New Zealand. There isn't a story that Martin van Beynen writes that I failed to read. There you go. And he is particularly apposite, instructive, and also insightful to do around some of our most sensational murder trials, but also events as well. His book on the Christchurch earthquake is a pretty seminal one too. And he joins us now to talk about, well, a case that's gripped New Zealand in 2023, and indeed when we look back on 2023, Lauren Dickason trial will be one of those events that defines this year. He joins us now, Martin van Beynen. Martin, fantastic to have you on the show. Welcome this afternoon.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for that very generous introduction.
You deserve all of it, my friend. You are a very fine writer. I was just saying before 12 o'clock that you're an old-fashioned journo in lots of ways. Where did you learn your trade?
Well, I started at the Otago Daily Times, and then I worked in community newspapers for a while, and then I went to the press, and I've been there for 32 years, I think. So yeah, you do pick up a few tricks along the way.
Well, actually, take me to that. Did you go straight from school to as a cadet reporter into the ODT?
No, I was a bit of a rouseabout when I left school. I did odd jobs, including a lot of sort of labouring type jobs. And I was a truck driver for a while. I was a welder. I went overseas, and I did a law degree. But I'd always wanted to be a journalist. I always thought that was almost a vocation. And it's probably a good idea that I did a few other things before I sat behind a desk.
Absolutely. I wish that was the common pathway now, not just for the teaching profession, but a lot of ones as well. Add politics and teaching to that one, mate. All right. You have sat through, I want to take you back before we talk about Lauren Dickason to and this is where I first got introduced to you, Martin, to do with the trial and acquittal of David Bain. What year was that? Remind me.
Well, the trial and acquittal was in 2009.
Right.
So he was released. David Bain was released from jail in 2007 after the Privy Council found there was a miscarriage of justice, and then it was another couple of years before there was a trial, and that was 2009.
I remember because I read you extensively. I ended up debating when I was hosting Radio Live Joe Karam on whether or not the jury had got the case right or wrong. And so I read you extensively on that. Your conclusion, I think, and forgive me if I'm wrong, please correct me if I am, was that you couldn't understand the jury's decision in that case.
Well, I could understand it. I just thought it was wrong. I mean, trials are always a bit of theatre, really, and so David Bain's defence did a very good job of putting a wedge into every little crack in the Crown case, and I think the juries vary. I thought that this jury was particularly unusual, and it's all written. It's all in my book, Black Hands, which was made into which started off as a podcast actually, and then I wrote the book, and then the book came out, and it was also a drama series, or that was really more about the lifestyle of the Bain family. So I thought they got it wrong. I thought it wasn't terribly difficult to reach a conclusion that David was guilty, in my view.
And I think the primary thing that you said from that book, or certainly the articles I've read, was that it was either Robin or David. There simply wasn't any evidence there that it could possibly have been Robin. I mean, physical evidence.
Well, there was. I mean, it depends what you mean by evidence. I didn't think there was any convincing evidence, but there were things like marks on Robin's hands, and it wasn't outside the realms of possibility that Robin could have done. There was a little bit of, and there was some blood on his hands in particular places, which you could argue would only have arrived there if Robin was the shooter. But I thought, okay, well, look, it's either Robin or David. You stack up all the evidence against David. You look at the evidence, the paucity of evidence against Robin, and you've got your answer. Basically, it's not like one person and then there's balanced evidence against on both sides.
Beyond reasonable doubt features obviously very extensively in New Zealand's criminal history law, LORE, and in that particular case, was the Crown case deficient, do you think? Is that why the jury came to it? You said they were unusual. First of all, what would you mean by unusual? But that second question, was the Crown case unable to prove beyond reasonable doubt to an average jury?
Yeah, well, I mean, juries are a bit of a lottery. Generally speaking, juries are pretty good. I think the Dickason jury, for instance, was very good. Because because there were certain things about the Bain jury, for instance, that I did hear afterwards that there was a group within the jury who wanted to acquit even before they'd heard the defence evidence. So they'd pretty much made up their minds. And that's just evidence that's just material that came out afterwards. I can't say how I know that, but anyway, that is true. And so normally, I don't know. I've never been on a jury, so it's a real mystery what happens in those jury rooms. But I haven't heard of that happening, but it may happen in other trials. I don't know. There were a couple of sort of half-pie lawyers there was a law student and there was a person with some legal training on the jury, and whether they exerted more influence than others, I don't know. It appears that they did. But yeah, so I think New Zealand's not like America where jurors can have a chat afterwards or explain how they reached a verdict. I sometimes think that'd be quite nice if we found out why.
Well, actually, on that, can I ask you, why is there a law that stops you as a journalist, 14 years after the date, having a chat with the juror and saying, what was it like inside the jury room?
Well, if the juror approaches me and says, look, I'd like to have a chat with you about what happened in the jury room, then the juror is actually breaking the law, I think. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's pretty clear. But journalists are not allowed to approach jurors unless in various exceptional circumstances. And in the Bain case, I did actually approach a juror after she ended up on radio and was talking about the trial, and I thought, well, this is highly unusual. We've got to find out why she's doing this. So I did approach her about that. So I think there's no. I think if a juror starts doing certain things that require questioning, I don't see that that journalists should be forbidden from talking to them. But it's a very touchy area, and jurors are not supposed to tell anybody what happened in the jury room. The deliberations should be confidential and remain confidential, and journalists are not allowed to approach jurors either during, obviously, or after the trial. So yeah, it's a pretty close shot.
That's unfortunate, as you say. All right, head to the Lauren Dickason case. It is a case that, just like the David Bain case, I think almost every New Zealander in the end develop an opinion on. What was the jury like? I think I've read, was it 7 women, 5 men? I think, was that the composition?
No, it was 8 women and 4 men. Yeah, and they were very attentive. They seem to have taken their job very seriously indeed. I mean, it's always hard to concentrate for 4 weeks, and a lot of the evidence was very repetitive. I mentioned this to some other person the other day, that the trials seem to be getting longer and longer, and everyone seems to think every stone must be unturned and every bit of evidence has got to be rehashed for every witness. So I thought the trial was longer than it needed to be, but and so it really was quite taxing on the jury. That's aside from the horrendous material that they had exposed to.
And just on that, the defence and the prosecution teams, you talk about the theatre of the High Court, and you're absolutely right. It can be theatric, but it can also be bloody boring. Were there any performers on the defence or the prosecution team, do you think, that strayed into the area of amateur theatrics, or was it all in that sort of monotone, we're just going to sketch out the facts for you?
In this case, no. I wouldn't have thought there were any theatrics from either side. I think that the nature of the charges in the trial meant that everyone took a fairly even or non-histrionic approach to the whole thing. The Crown was particularly good. He was, played it straight down the line, and the defence did a good job too. They avoided, any great theatrics and casting the Crown in a terrible light, that sort of thing, or making extravagant statements about the police or evidence or anything like that. The whole thing was really a textbook trial in many ways, I thought, apart from the fact that it was far too long.
I surmise your commentary that was being reported in Stuff. You were sort of updating every 10, 15 minutes. That was mostly you?
No, that wasn't me. We had another reporter, Jake Kenny, who did a great job of a live blog. So that the live blog appeared on Stuff, which was free to anybody who looked at the website, and then I produced a story each day, plus I did the long read at the end, and I did a couple of summary type stories. Right.
Well, I followed the live blog, obviously, like I guess a lot of New Zealanders did. Can I ask, do you actually test whether or not people are reading that? So you've got reader numbers on that at all?
Yes, we do test that, and the readers were through the roof on that one.
I can imagine. All right, so I guess the next question I would have of you is, there were moments that appeared to me reading the live blog that was seminal. So you just read something and you went, oh my God. Were there any of those oh my God moments for you, or as you were watching the trial, Martin?
Yeah, there were so many really. I guess that right at the beginning we had the police interview that was played to the court, and this was the police interviewing Lauren Dickason only within 24 hours of the offending, and she must have been in a terrible state, and she was obviously very depressed, and yet she was quite coherent. And police would be criticised afterwards for interviewing her so quickly after the offending. But anyway, in that interview, she made no mention of the fact that she was acting that she thought she was acting in the best interest of the children, which was always going to. So that made when the defence claimed that Lauren Dickason was acting in the best interests or thought the children were better off dead, it made it more difficult for them because in some ways, the earlier you interview people after these events, the better, and there she didn't make any mention of it.
Now, the jury asked to have that particular interview replayed to them. Was that correct?
That's right, they did. In fact, it was the first thing they asked for, even before. So they went out. They were sent out to begin their deliberations, and straight away there was a request from the court to replay the police interview. So it was an hour long, and they also had a transcript. But it was gripping viewing in an awful sense, and there were a lot of information there about her background, and it was a very wide-ranging interview, a very sympathetic interview too. And I suppose the police were trying to get her to tell them as much as possible. So that they were encouraging, they were sympathetic, and it would all be used against her in the trial.
Well, that's the irony,
so,
isn't it?
That is the irony, yeah.
Now, for you, my wife was sitting on the fence. I had made up my mind long before the case. My wife was sitting on the fence, but she said that there was a moment for her reading the live blog that just got her. And that was very early on the piece where Lauren Dickason said something along the lines of, and when asked how she ordered the killing of her children, chose one child in specific because she had been irritating her the most. Was that the same oh my God moment for you in the courtroom and for others?
Yes, no, that was one of those moments, and that came out through the. Well, I think it was in the opening. I think the Crown opened on that. So it was a 2-hour opening by the Crown. They covered most of the main points that we hear throughout the trial. So that was that sounded horrendous, and she went through that. So Lauren Dickason went through that in the police interview, and she would later say that there was no particular order in which she killed the children. There was no reason for the order, so again a very damaging statement in her police interview, and that was sort of backed up the Crown theory that she acted out of anger, which was given the fact that it was such a prolonged event in terms of killing the children. It always struck me as it would have to be pretty long, cold anger to carry on throughout the killings.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people at home were thinking too. Oh my God, you start with one, but then you carry on. Just how? Can I ask for you though, you personally, was there a moment that you went, that's it, that's obvious? Not really, no. Because there were moments where you thought, my goodness, that's a damning statement, or that's a damning bit of evidence.
But in fact, there was usually, because you see both sides, and you're expected to report both sides. For most of those damning moments, there was another side to the story, so to speak. So, for instance, I think you could feel that the police interview was open and shut case, and yet this was a woman who had just come out of hospital, probably still suffering from some of the drugs in her system. She'd been discharged from hospital, so she was fit enough to leave. But had just killed her children. She was depressed, and then she was interviewed. So you have to take that into account. Also, she was interviewed for 50 hours after the event, and over the space of 18 months or something like that, and she was asked about those things, and often there was a sort of another comment that you thought, oh yeah, okay, well maybe that's understandable, or we can see now what you were thinking, something like that.
The other thing that struck me too was the toughness of the jury. I commented on it. We had Marie Dyberg, Casey, on the program a week ago, or a couple of weeks ago, prior to the verdict, and her saying how difficult it must be for the jury because they're essentially not. This isn't a fact-based case. This is I'm distinguishing between opinions and deciding which of those opinions is the most appropriate. Did that strike you the same way as well?
Well, I thought about that, and yes, there were two camps, but the jury didn't really have to decide which they liked best or which they felt was stronger. The test for them was infanticide was the defence, and infanticide is a defence that the Crown must negate beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's the test. I mean, you could still think maybe the other side has got a point, but I prefer the other side. So it's not quite as stark as, well, they're right and this one is wrong. The legal tests are for infanticide has the Crown negated the infanticide defence, which is well, I won't go into that. You've already heard that from Marie Dyberg, no doubt. And then in terms of the insanity, the test was has the defence proved on the balance of probabilities that Lauren Dickason did not know that what she was doing was wrong. In other words, did she think she was doing the right thing? Because the interesting thing is, she could have thought, well, everyone else would think I'm doing the wrong thing. So in other words, she does appreciate she's doing the wrong thing. But she might have thought, well, they're wrong, I'm right. I'm doing the right thing for my children.
The demeanour of Lauren Dickason during the trial, Martin, did it change? She had to sit through this for 4 weeks, presumably herself. What was her demeanour like?
Well, I got the impression she was probably on some fairly heavy drugs. But having said that, she had to sit there and listen to experts regurgitate what she had told them about how she killed the children. And, we weren't able to publish half of it because that was suppressed. But she had to listen to it. And it must have been horrendous. And she would put her head in her hands and weep, basically, through a lot of it. When the experts started giving their opinions and it became quite technical or medical, I mean, she was a doctor after all, she seemed quite engaged and interested and just like any other member of the, she could have been sitting in the public gallery and you wouldn't have batted an eyelid. So it varied quite a bit, and she always had a nurse with her, a psychiatric nurse with her, and I assumed we were told that the nurse would be there just to monitor her psychiatric state throughout the trial. But she turned up every day, and she looked like a very distressed woman a lot of the time.
You just mentioned the suppression of details to do with the killing of the children. Why were they suppressed, Martin? Is that because they were so horrific? Well,
that wasn't the reason. That wasn't. It could have been. I mean, that was open to the judge. But I think in this case, the judge was looking at the Criminal Procedure Act, which allows the court to suppress things on certain grounds one of those grounds is undue hardship to the victims. Now, one of the victims is obviously Graham Dickason, who was watching the trial from South Africa. And the judge was very conscious of the fact that any this material would end up with a sort of international audience. Everyone would know what had happened to these little girls, and that could be terribly difficult for the family. So he suppressed the worst of it. Having said that, there's material in the police interview which I would have thought was bad enough, particularly where the oldest girl, Leanne, talked about, told her mum, you're the best mum, we love you, well, before her death. So that sort of thing. But it got a lot worse than that. So the judge made his decision, and I don't think too many people would disagree with him.
You listened to it, though, and so did everybody there, so did the jury. Did it affect you?
Well, see, I've done a lot of these sort of trials. I mean, I did the mosque shootings, I did the Bain trial, I did this terrible case in Dunedin where a guy shot his 2 kids and then shot himself.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Mm.
What was his name? I forget it.
Yeah, that was the former corrections officer.
He was a prison guard.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, he was a prison officer. I did the coroner's report on that. So I don't know whether you get hardened to these things, but as a reporter, we've got a job to do, and it's very easy to sort of divert yourself into what you have to do. But there was one day where the clinical psychologist, his name was Razi Metwi, and he was a lovely guy who probably had the best rapport with Lauren Dickason, and he spent 20 hours with her, and she told him a lot. And when we heard what she had told him, I think we all sat there we all had a moment, I think, where we all thought, my God, did it really get that bad? But at the end, when the verdicts came through, there's quite a lot of emotion from everybody, really, including reporters, some of the reporters, because as I said in my story, I think we realised, crikey, this woman has been found guilty of murdering her children. The enormity of that is pretty hard to take.
Mm. Well, I've always thought about it from the perspective of the victims and what their last moments must have been, and the horror that must have eventuated from that. As a parent, Martin, very difficult to deal with. So I'm glad I wasn't in that jury room. Next part of this, though, is, were you surprised at the verdict? Now, the verdict, as you say, found her guilty of murdering her 3 children. It rejected both the defences of infanticide and insanity. Were you personally surprised at the verdict?
Yes, I was. I was a bit shocked, mainly because I thought the jury would have gone for a less, sort of more nuanced verdict, when they had 3 other options. And I thought they might have gone for infanticide or insanity, because when you think about it, she wasn't sane, and yet she wasn't insane enough to not know what she was doing was wrong in the jury's view. So you sort of wonder whether the test is suitable. I mean, the test for insanity is, at the end of the day, the test is, did this person know what they were doing was wrong?
Yeah.
And the jury was probably I thought people have said after this trial that this should have been decided by a panel of experts, and maybe that's true. But in the end, the jury heard all the information that the psychiatrists and the clinical psychologist heard. They reached their view, and it wasn't a complex scientific problem. They had the same material, and they had the diagnosis, so they had to make a decision. And in a way, I thought, a panel of 12 ordinary people is probably not a bad way of doing it.
And it was decided, I think, 11-1, is that right, or 10-1?
No, it was 11-1.
It was 11-1.
So there was one dissenter.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
The judge, I thought his comments in discharging the jury, well, certainly from this perspective anyhow, seem ambivalent to me as to the verdict that they had reached. Did you get the same perspective or not?
No, they never say, judges never tell a jury, gee, you got that right, or I disagree with you.
No.
They never do that. And he was, judges are normally very to the jurors, and Justice Cameron Mander was no exception. He was very respectful towards them. He told them at the beginning that it's your job, it's not my job to decide the facts, it's your job to come up with a verdict. I'm the expert on the law. And now he may say something at sentencing. He wouldn't. That's not unprecedented. That a judge might say a jury has come to its verdict, and I agree with them. So who knows what the judge thought? I mean, he was straight down the middle with his summing up, and he didn't have to make the decision. Grounds
for appeal, not on the basis of a point of law, from what you seem to say.
I don't think so. No, I think the judge's summing up on the law, or his directions on the law, were probably unassailable. I don't think there was anything during the trial which they may, a decision made by the judge which disadvantaged the defence in any way. It's hard to see anything like that, but you never know. And so you get down to an appeal on the grounds that no reasonable jury would have come to that verdict, and that's not going to wash because they had plenty of evidence on which they could base a reasonable verdict.
Well, and also there's the Crown prosecuting. Marie Dyberg made the point to us too, Martin, that usually insanity offences come to a sort of a consensus between both prosecution and defence. The defence goes and gets a psychiatric report, they share it with the prosecution, and the prosecution agree that, that person's probably insane. But in this particular case, the prosecution decided there was a case and that they wouldn't accept an insanity defence, yeah?
Yes, that's generally the way it goes. I think the case still comes back to court, but it's there's it's more of a formality. But the Crown or the police must have got some advice from the Crown, and it was decided to put it to a jury. The trouble that I mean, every case is unique, but some of the extraordinary features about this case was that this woman was not, like Lauren Dickason, was not sort of acting like a zombie when she killed the children. She conducted she had to do a lot of things to achieve what she wanted, and that required quite a lot of thinking and some fairly involved thought processes. So you couldn't say, well, this woman was really out of it. She was just completely out of it, as you often think within the insanity defence. But see, New Zealand, we don't have a lot of history with these sort of offences. So, I mean, I'm sure if you looked on the internet, you'd probably find a number of cases where women have killed their children thinking they were doing it for the best, where they carried out some fairly rational, complicated exercises.
Now, obviously, next for you, you're going to make a book of this?
Well, if a publisher was interested, I might look at it. I'm not sure what the appetite would be out there for a book like this, but I'm sure someone will do it.
Gosh, I think you'd have an international audience. The Bain audience was very much New
I think
Zealand.
you would. Yeah, no, I think it would have an international audience. But we talked about, do people really want to read this stuff? And that's the question, isn't it? Do they really want to be confronted with this stuff to the extent they want to read a book about it? I think that's the question for a publisher.
Well, there's a case in America, in the UK at the moment. You'll know about it. Lucy Letby.
Yes. Yeah, the Letby case. Yeah.
The baby killer, serial baby killer. Now she's not too well, and even worse. Or I don't know if they could be worse. They could certainly comparable. But I guess there is a fascination with women who kill, an awful fascination, because we do not expect mothers or women in these sorts of situations to perform these sorts of gross deeds, do we?
No, we don't. Well, in the Dickason case, you've got a mother who cared very deeply about her children, and she loved them and did lots of things for them, and she probably she might have felt aggrieved, and she might have felt frustrated, and she might have felt angry, but so many mothers would have empathised with that. And it was interesting to get the response from men and women. I had the impression that men were actually less
sympathetic.
We're more sympathetic.
Oh, did you?
And women less.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
But other people have had the opposite reaction. So, it was interesting. I thought women would be more sympathetic, and they may well be. But you look at your own wife, I think she made up her mind reasonably soon. And yet my wife can empathise. So, interesting.
Yes. Well, it provokes that sort of emotional response, doesn't it? Because we automatically put ourselves back into the position when we had children that age.
Exactly. Yeah.
Martin.
I mean, the great tragedy about this is that it could have been. She just needed to phone her husband, who would have come home. It wasn't as though she was left all on her own and she was an abused wife and she'd had a terrible upbringing and all that sort of thing. It wouldn't have taken much just for her to get over that episode of depression to get on a slightly more even keel.
One of the things that came out on that depression is that we now know that she had been suffering from depression from, I think, from age 16. It had been an ever-present part of her adult life. She was on medication in South Africa before she got here. Can you just confirm to me, because I haven't got this quite clear, did she go off the medication in South Africa for purposes of satisfying New Zealand immigration standards?
That was definitely part of it. So she'd been on medication for 12 years or something, non-stop. She never stopped it. And then come March 2021, that's only, like 5 months before the killings, she had a period where she seemed to be feeling a lot better, and she was doing this fitness program, and she lost a lot of weight, and she had moments where she thought life was great. She loved the kids. She loved being with the children. But also you couldn't help, and this was mentioned in the trial several times, that she wanted to make a good impression on immigration officials and get a clean bill of health. Because one of the things that increased her hopelessness when she was in New Zealand was Immigration New Zealand said, "Oh, look, we've got this report on your psychiatric history, but we're going to have a new one." And she realised that, well, the way I'm feeling now, I'm never going to get one. They'll lock me up. They were her exact words. They will lock me up. And one of the psychiatrists in evidence said, if I had seen her on the day of the killings, I would have committed her straight away, pretty much straight away. Well, she was think he said she would readily meet the criteria for being committed. Yeah. I'm sorry to have taken up so much time.
Martin, no, this has been, without doubt, one of the most fascinating interviews I've ever conducted in my life. And I always enjoy talking to somebody who has the intelligence and insight that you possess in spades. This has been a difficult time for you as well, and for every other journalist covering this case. But unfortunately, I think, as I said to you, we can probably all equate this because of our own experience with our own children at that time in our lives. And so it sends an emotional reaction to every sentient, I would suggest, and sensitive human being. Like I couldn't agree more. And we had 3 children under 5 too. So, I know how hard it can be. Thank you very much for your time, Martin. It's a pleasure talking to you. Very best of luck to you.